I start this year incredibly optimistic about what our country can achieve. Yes, cuts in spending will be felt, and yes, they will be difficult, but they are absolutely vital in restoring the credibility and confidence that will mean jobs and growth in the future. But the scale of this coalition government's ambitions for Britain go far beyond fixing our economy. I want one of the great achievements of this government to be the complete modernisation of our public services. I want us to make our schools and hospitals amongst the best in the world, to open them up and make them competitive, more local, more transparent, to give more choice to those who use our public services and more freedom to the professionals who deliver them. I don't want anyone to be in any doubt about how important this is to me. And my passion about this is both personal and political. Personal because I've experienced at first hand just how dedicated, how professional, how compassionate our best public servants are. I think of the doctors who cared for my eldest son. I think of the maternity nurses who welcomed my youngest daughter into the world, without much warning, it has to be said. I think of the teachers who are currently inspiring my children. All of them have touched my life and my family's life in an extraordinary way, and I want to do right by them. And this is a political passion and priority of mine too. I believe that Britain can be one of the great success stories of the new decade. We've got the creativity and the energy, we've got the language and the global position, we have the relationships abroad, the stability at home, to make the most of the opportunities that globalization is bringing. And one of the keys to success for countries like ours will be the performance of our public services. We've got to champion excellence and stop the slide against our competitors. In Shanghai, the average child is 2 years ahead of a child here. In Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Austria, and interestingly, Poland, you're less likely to die once admitted into hospital after a heart attack than you are in the UK. Put simply, we can't be a modern success story unless we have modern, successful public services. And this is not an alternative to dealing with our debts, it's actually a key part of it. Like every other Western industrialized nation, we won't sustainably live within our means with unreformed public services and outdated welfare systems. We have to be completely focused on getting more for less in our public services. And this argument about modernisation is not just a hard-headed one about Britain's place in the world or value for money. In my view, it's also a deeply progressive argument. We should be clear about where our public services have succeeded in making our country fairer and more equal over the years, but we should be just as frank about where they have failed. And the truth is that we will not eliminate the deep scars of poverty or the huge inequalities in our country if we go on with public services as they operate today. But quite apart from all these practical arguments for modernisation, there's what I'd call the people argument. If politics is about anything, it's about focusing on those things people really care about and making them better. And there is nothing more important to people than the education their child gets, the care their parent receives, or the safety of the streets they walk down. And I share that burning impatience that many, many people in our country feel, who are frustrated that in too many instances we are asked to settle for second best. I passionately believe that it just doesn't have to be this way. We can change these things. So we're determined to modernise our public services and make them better for everyone. Now, I predict that some eyes are rolling. People feel, well, we've heard all this before, and yes, you have. Many politicians have stood on platforms like these, stating similar ambitions, but all too often, despite minor improvements here or there, nothing really fundamental changes. Added to that, I know that you have concerns about the conditions we're working in and the changes that we plan. So today, I want to try and answer as directly as I can the questions that I believe people have. First, how can we modernise public services when there's so little money? Second, why do we believe that there is a real prospect of our succeeding in modernising public services when so many previous governments have not? Third, won't there be losers from the changes that we propose? And fourth, is it right to make all these changes so fast, so soon? Let me take each in turn. First, the money question. How do you modernise public services when there's so little money? Well, to begin with, I think we need some perspective. Of course, there are things government does today that it will have to stop doing. Of course, some decisions will be difficult and will involve difficulties. But when we're done with these cuts, spending on public services will actually be at the same level as it was in 2006. We will still be spending 41% of our GDP on the public sector. And beyond those headline figures, think of this. We'll still be spending £5,000 a year on educating every child in our country, with even more money for those from the poorest backgrounds. That is the same as in Germany and more than in France. There'll still be as many police officers in the Metropolitan Police as there are in New York. And because we're increasing the NHS budget, £10 billion through this Parliament, health spending will be up at the European average. So it's not true to say that the spending taps are simply going to be switched off. The money will be there and we have got to spend it wisely. And let's also remember this. There are some improvements we need to make that don't necessarily cost money. Enforcing discipline in schools. This shouldn't cost money. Getting pupils to take a wider range of core academic GCSEs. That shouldn't cost money. A commitment to rigour and standards in our exam system. This won't cost money. But there is today a more important argument I want to make about money and our public services. Every year, without modernisation, the costs of our public services escalate. Demand rises, the chains of command can grow, costs may go up, inefficiencies can become more entrenched. Take the National Health Service. We face enormous pressures on demand, driven by an ageing population, obesity and alcohol abuse, and the rise of infectious diseases like TB. And at the same time, we have rising pressures on costs, with expensive new drugs and technological innovations like genetics, nanotechnology and robotics, all being integrated into the work of healthcare. So pretending that there's a sort of easy option of sticking with the status quo and hoping that a little bit of extra money will smooth over the challenges, I think is a complete fiction. We need modernisation on both sides of the equation. Modernisation to do something about the demand for healthcare, which is about public health, and modernisation to make the supply of healthcare more efficient, which is about opening up the system, being competitive, cutting out waste and bureaucracy. Put another way, it's not that we can't afford to modernise, it's that we can't afford not to modernise. The second question is this. Why does this government believe it has a chance of success in modernising public services when so many others have not? Indeed, given it's a coalition, how will we even agree on what change is needed, let alone go on and deliver it? Well, I would say this. Yes, of course, we have differences of opinion. But politics, as I've said this before, should be no different from the rest of life, where rational people try and find a way of overcoming disagreements. And indeed, what I've found so far is that instead of arguing about sort of tribal dividing lines or sticking to long-cherished positions, what we're actually doing is having a proper discussion about what really works. And as you can see, with radical policies from the universal credit in welfare to free schools in education or strengthening our universities, the policies that result can actually be more wide-ranging, more effective than when you're working on your own. But there's another reason why I believe this government can really succeed. It's because we have tried, and will go on trying, really hard to learn the lessons of the past. We recognise the good things that previous governments did, and we're going to do more of them, and we also understand where they failed, and we're going to avoid making those mistakes. I believe previous Conservative governments had some very good ideas about introducing choice and competition to health and education, so people were more in the driving seat. But there was insufficient respect for the ethos of public services and public service. The impression was given that there was a sort of clear dividing line running through our economy, with the wealth creators of the private sector on one side paying for the wealth consumers of the public sector on the other side. Now, this analysis was, and frankly still is, too simplistic. Public sector employees don't just provide a great public service, they contribute directly to wealth creation. It's not just that, for instance, teachers nurture the human capital that will create future enterprise, or that nurses help keep the nation healthy and working. Parts of the public sector help generate innovation and wealth more directly. Like our teaching hospitals and universities, which I've seen for myself, can be one of the great wealth-creating engines of our 21st century knowledge-based economy. All of this has to be recognised. Now, in many ways, the last government, the problem was the opposite. There was tremendous respect for the ethos of public services, but not enough emphasis on opening them up. For sure, Tony Blair introduced academies and increased independent provision in the National Health Service, but he did so while maintaining a whole architecture of bureaucracy and targets, and I believe significantly understated the valuable role of charities and the voluntary sector. What's more, when he did try to be bolder, he got blocked by, and too often gave in to, vested interests. Foundation hospitals could only go ahead with endless restrictions on what they could do. School reform could only go at a pace that the trade unions, and frequently Gordon Brown, could tolerate. Reading his, frankly, intriguing memoir over the summer, I was struck by how many times he himself admits that opportunities were lost and that Labour should have pushed further and faster on reform. So I think the lessons from the past were clear. The right were guilty of focusing too much on markets, the left were guilty of focusing too much on the state, and both forgot that space in between, society. And having watched, absorbed, and I hope learnt from all of this, I believe this coalition has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform our public services. From schools to the NHS, policing and prisons, we have developed a clear plan for modernisation based on a common approach. A big society approach which empowers not only service users, but professionals, that strengthens not only existing providers, but new ones in the private and voluntary sectors too. Our starting point is huge respect for the ethos of our public services and a commitment to advance it. Free to all who need it, universal coverage, impartiality, these are principles that must never come under threat. And we will also liberate the people who work in our public services. We have incredible, extraordinary talent in our public services, from surgeons who lead the world in open heart surgery to teachers driven by a calling to transform the lives of our children. And we want to give them the freedom to get on with the job that they love. So we're taking apart the targets, the inspection regimes, the thickets of guidance that smother doctors, nurses, teachers, and police officers. For example, one obstacle teachers face in restoring discipline is they have to give, in writing, 24 hours notice for a detention. Now, we're getting rid of that rule and giving teachers much greater control over order in their classrooms. But freedom for professionals isn't just about getting rid of the bureaucracy. It's about actively empowering them to deliver the best service. That is what we're doing. So there are new powers to enable public sector workers to take ownership of their organisations and form mutuals and cooperatives. New powers for new and existing providers in welfare, drug rehab, the reduction of reoffending, and early years support to focus on the needs of users with an assurance from us to pay them by the results they achieve. No interference from on high telling them what to do, just the open tendering of contracts, complete professional freedom, and a commitment to encourage innovation combined with proper rewards for the good work that they do. There are also new powers for schools, including for the first time special schools to turn into academies with the freedom to enforce rigorous discipline policies, pay more for good staff, and develop excellent extracurricular activities. And new powers for GPs, who can join together in consortia, take control of NHS budgets, and directly commission services for their patients. Now, people have said, well, it's all very well, but there's going to be no appetite for this. But I can tell you today, the enthusiasm of head teachers has meant that we have created as many academies in 7 months as Labour managed in 7 years. And far from fearing new commissioning arrangements, over 140 GP-led consortia have come forward, covering half of the country. But this freedom, and I think this is vital, this freedom does not mean a free-for-all without proper accountability or a focus on results. Far from it. In return for this freedom from central government, professionals will have someone new to answer to: the people. We're giving people the power to shape and design the public services they use. So we are spreading choice, saying to any patient or parent, You can choose where your child gets sent to school or where you get treated, and we'll back that decision with state money. We're injecting competition, saying to the private sector, to community organisations, social enterprises, charities, come into the public sector and deliver great public services. Already people are answering that call, not least in education, where the first free schools will open in September. I myself met the inspirational parents and local leaders who are going to set up the first of these in Clare in Suffolk. A small community in a rural area where children faced long commutes to school will now have a high-quality school on their doorstep. And next week in our education bill, we will be going further. For the first time, charities, universities, businesses, teachers, groups of parents will be able to establish their own academies where there is a lack of suitable education for 16 to 19-year-olds. Based on the same principles that underpin our free school programme, this will widen the range of options available to young people and encourage them to continue in education past their GCSEs. We're also bringing real democratic legitimacy to our public services too. On the way in, our new elected police and crime commissioners that local people can vote in, and if these commissioners don't deliver on their promises, they will be answerable to the public at the ballot box. And at the same time as doing all of this, we're also going to make everything as transparent as possible. So people will not only know where the money is spent in our public services, but they're going to know how well that money is spent too on health outcomes, school results, crime figures, the things that they actually care about. So what I believe I've described is something that is clear, consistent, a comprehensive plan that covers all of the public services. And returning to my point about the coalition, I believe it's a programme that Conservatives and Liberal Democrats can give their wholehearted support to. Revere, cherish and reward an ethos of public service. Free professionals from top-down control and bureaucracy. Give choice to the user. Encourage competition between the suppliers. Pay by results wherever appropriate. Publish information available everywhere you can. Make public service professionals answer to people rather than to the government machine. And you will get services that are more local, more accountable, more personal, where people are the drivers, not passengers, which call on every part of society, from churches to charities, business to community organisations, to come in and make a difference. It really is, I believe, a complete change in the way our public services are run. From top-down bureaucracy to bottom-up innovation, from closed markets to open systems, from big government to big society. Now, even if people accept that there are reasons to say we're well placed to make these changes, they do have another question, an important question. Won't the changes we are making create losers? They worry that our approach is a kind of public services version of a laissez-faire economic policy, where winners are created at the expense of those who get left behind. Now, I believe these worries are profoundly misguided, and I want to try and explain why. First of all, we are not proposing laissez-faire. The state will still have hugely important responsibilities to ensure clear basic standards are met, that the rights of users are maintained, and that independent inspection is carried out in our public services, and we're not abrogating that. Indeed, in education, Michael Gove last week has raised the targets for school performance so that underperforming schools are turned around even more quickly. And yes, added to that, I also believe extra resources must be directed to those who are most disadvantaged. That's why for the first time ever, there will be a specific payment to schools, a pupil premium, for every child entitled to free school meals. But isn't the real point this? If we've learned anything about public service reform in the past few decades, it's that simply setting standards and issuing diktats from the centre doesn't mean they actually happen. We do need the structural changes, not just edicts about standards. While one-size-fits-all state provision played a huge role in the past in reducing inequalities, in recent years it has failed to do so. Indeed, arguably, it's actually deepened the disparities between regions, between classes, between racial groups in our society. I think the evidence for this is pretty clear. For instance, health inequalities in 21st century Britain are as wide as they were in Victorian times. Today, a quarter of all children, overwhelmingly from the most disadvantaged families, don't get a single A or B at GCSE. And I think one of the reasons for this is also clear. Exercising choice to escape poor service is available to the richest, who can just opt out and go private, or to the middle classes, who can move house for instance, to get the best school, but the poorest have to take what they're given. So the approach of relying on Whitehall diktats rather than real structural change has failed the very people it was trying to protect. And worst of all, those who lose out are pretty powerless to do anything about it. Our structural changes can help them. Just consider the evidence of the most recent years in those areas where the principles of competition, choice, and greater independence for institutions have been introduced. Some of our foundation hospitals are bringing the very best care to the people who need it most. City technology colleges and academies are transforming educational results in some of our poorest communities. These structural breakthroughs have given new opportunities to those in the poorest areas who've been let down by the old system. And the next great, if you like, poverty-busting structural change that we need, the expansion of university technical schools, I believe will do the same, offering first-class technical skills to those turned off by purely academic study. And again, we should be making sure they are in areas of great deprivation. Now, there's a simple logic to this. With more freedom and openness comes more creativity and innovation. And with competition comes the pressure to keep up with the best. So for us, inequality is no longer simply the static symbol of unfairness that it is today, but rather it's a potent call to arms. It's a kickstart, if you like, to the actual mechanism that will help drive the delivery of a better service for everyone. All too often, what the people who criticise our plans are demanding is really something of a race to the bottom, where the cause of fairness is used malevolently to prevent any innovation or progress that could allow one child or one school to do better than another. What we propose is a race to the top, where experimentation and innovation in one place gives everyone the chance to learn and benefit from each other. A real race for excellence, improvements across the board, not a black and white world of winners and losers, but a world where everyone has their opportunity to make the most of their potential. Now, the fourth question people ask is this: do we have to make all these changes so fast, so soon? They accept the need for change, but they're concerned about the pace. They fear we're doing too much at once. Now, of course, these changes have to be carefully worked through, and that's exactly what I would argue we've done, years of preparation in opposition, and we must continue to do this every day in government. But remember this: every year we delay, every year without improving our schools, is another year of children let down. Another year of our health outcomes lagging behind the best in Europe. Another year that trust and confidence in law and order erodes. These reforms, to me, aren't about theory or ideology. They're about people's lives. Your lives, the lives of the people you and I care about most, our children, our families, our friends. So I have to say to people, if not now, then when? We should not put this off any longer. And there is, I believe, another case for urgency. The longer you leave things in government, the greater the institutional inertia against change becomes. Tony Blair as good as admits this, that he wasted his first term flogging the dead horse of centralised control. Is it any surprise that when he came to more real modernisation, an agenda that promoted choice and competition, the government machine was sceptical and slow to move? Was this another fad that would be reversed, or was this serious? We have set out our stall from the beginning, leaving no one in doubt. This coalition is serious about modernisation. This week, our health bill will be put before Parliament. Next week, our education bill will be put forward. Next month, we're publishing a white paper on the next steps for modernising our public services. 8 months in, and you can see we're simply not wasting a moment in attempting to deliver first-class, world-class public services in our country. Let me end with a message for the people these reforms will affect the most: those who work in our public services and those who use them. To our public sector workers, no one believes that the budget deficit is the fault of public sector workers. Responsibility lies squarely with ministers in the last government who allowed spending to run out of control. And as we take the tough but necessary decisions to deal with the deficit, our first priority is to protect frontline services and to protect jobs in the public services. Now, we won't be able to avoid job losses entirely. That would be unrealistic. But by taking swift and radical action to cut the overhead costs of government, we've given ourselves the best chance there is to protect jobs. By squeezing what we pay to suppliers, by cutting spending on wasteful IT projects, by simply dropping some projects that we're never going to deliver, by our moratorium on advertising, marketing, on consultants. All these tough, and I accept completely unglamorous measures, will save in the region of £3 billion just in this financial year alone. Every pound saved this way helps to save jobs and services. At the same time, we want the jobs of the future in public services to be more fulfilling, empowering you on the front line, freeing you from the top-down micromanagement and targetry that's driven you mad, supporting groups of workers who want to form mutuals and cooperatives to deliver services themselves, liberating the hidden army of public service entrepreneurs who are deeply seized with the public service ethos, but who itch to innovate and drive improvement themselves. I know there is a hunger for this. When we launched our public sector spending challenge in the summer, some were quite cynical. Yet 65,000 public sector workers submitted ideas for how money could be saved without damaging the quality of service. There's a huge pent-up frustration among so many public sector workers who see how things could be different but can't make it happen. The modernisation that I've outlined today will give you that power. And to the country at large, let me say this. Everything I've spoken about today, the ideas that guide modernisation, the plans that shape it, these are not the final destination. The final destination for us is not more freedom for professionals, more choice for you, more competition in our public services. Those are the means, not the ends. The ends are those things which are more difficult to measure, but you know it when you feel it, when you see it. The sense that first-class healthcare is available to all, regardless of their wealth. That every child grows up with the doors of opportunity open to them, where birth is never a barrier, because they have a great school down their road. That every citizen feels safe in their neighbourhood, with trust and confidence restored to law and order. This, to me, goes right to the heart of what we stand for. The quality of care we offer in our health service is a measure of the country we are. The quality of education we offer our children is a measure of the country we can become. As a nation, I think we have great pride, rightly, in our history of public services, in the creation of the NHS, in the principles of state-funded healthcare and education for all. And it's the mission of this coalition government to renew that promise of opportunity, fairness and excellence for all in our public services today and into the future. Thank you for listening.